Sicon Manufacturing is made up of a number of elements. Most people think of it as being just works order processing. Now that is linked to the Sage BOM, where we rely on the Sage BOM being there in order for that to work. And as we go through and look at the demo, you'll see there's basically a copy of that and allows sort of a real-time processing of a BOM. We also have kitting in our manufacturing. There's a number of clients who use kitting. Sometimes just kitting along with material planning. Their manufacturing is not so complicated. Obviously, capacity planning is very important with having a scheduler to be able to schedule your works orders or your teams or the individual operations that you have. Shop floor data capture, again, is another part that if you're going to offer a manufacturing solution, you need to be able to capture that data, understand the time that's being booked and the progress of those works orders through production. Job costing might seem like a funny one to have in our manufacturing, but about half of our clients do bespoke projects, some of them entirely, some of them as part of what they do. And job costing forms an important element for an awful lot of manufacturing companies, and we've made quite a few changes in that product to accommodate what they need to do. And obviously we talked about the barcoding and warehousing. A lot of people in manufacturing are moving a lot of parts around, and that really helps with accuracy. So we talked about two distinct types of manufacturers. So you have your typical, call them mass volume companies who are building the same things from a fixed BOM with repeat orders coming in over and over and over again. That's quite straightforward. That's where you expect to have a works order running and all the standard things that we're used to doing in manufacturing. But we also have a number of clients, as we said earlier, some of them entirely bespoke project driven, building very, very large structures or vessels. And really they have no BOM. They have a very detailed architect's drawing, but no works orders whatsoever. And that's where the job costing side of things comes in to cover that type of client. And then obviously there's clients in the middle of there that have a bit of both of those things as well. So I put a diagram together that explains what the package does. So the green elements are Sage 200 elements, just to show where the interactions are happening. And following down through this diagram, really it's starting up here with our sales forecast or sales orders. So in normal processing, a sales order is going to go on. It's going to reference the bill of material in order to generate a works order with the relevant components on and explode out the sub-assemblies. That's also going to generate the operations that are required to complete that works order as well. So the most common thing for most clients is they need material planning. That's their biggest priority. So we use the works order. It has a list of materials on there and obviously a date when we're going to start that works order. That then drives into material planning. In the background behind material planning, we have a facility called Future Stock Movements that we built, which is a real-time analysis of every single stock item, when things are due in and when they're going out and when they're likely to go negative. So material planning is referencing that. It's also looking at the Sage 200 minimum stock, any outstanding purchase orders, and it'll run through and explode any forecasts out as well. So there's a full demand for absolutely everything in the system. The results of that are a bunch of warnings. So where purchase orders are not going to come in time, and where works orders may not get created in time to fulfill the sales orders that they're being generated for. We also generate reschedule messages where purchase orders could be pulled forward, if possible, pushed back, cancelled, and same with works orders. The result of that is what most people are looking for is suggested purchase orders. Obviously, in some cases, there's also going to be suggested works orders if they haven't been generated yet to fulfill demand. But suggested purchase orders can then be generated straight out to Sage 200 as standard POs within the system, but they're linked back to that MRP demand and the reasons they were originally generated, which is really helpful if you come to look at an order later on. So going through the works order, obviously with each of the individual lines in a works order, we can allocate them and issue them. So those are standard Sage 200 things. Once we've allocated and issued all components, we can then book stock in. Fairly simple process, which we'll see running through. Over the other side, we have capacity planning. So here we're using the operations and the durations of each of those operations to work out how much demand we actually have for labour and machine. So we also feed into that are Sicon employees that belong to teams and have certain work patterns which give some limitations to the amount of hours available. We can also feed in timesheets and holidays and bank holidays in there to reduce the amount of time available. So the output from the capacities, a quick rough cut that looks at the total overall scenario with total hours available for each of the teams and the demand in each of the teams. Along with that, we've got overdue works orders which we total up and show them separately with the number of hours, and then the overloads for those resources that are just basically out of time. On top of that, the real demanding thing from everybody is the real-time production schedulers, and we provide 3 of those at works order level, team level and operation level. And you notice at the bottom of the screen as well we have job costing. So importantly, where we have mixed companies who are working on projects and doing manufacturing, all of these things can work in conjunction with a job in order to keep everything together. One kind of costing solution for the whole thing. This screen just elaborates out a bit more about the works order processing. It expands out a bit more on what creates the demand, the relevant breakdown of the works order, so the materials, the labour of the machine, the operations, the subcontract, and how those interact across the system. The allocations we've created in here actually something that we've enhanced a little bit to allow us to move stock around in the warehouse. So every allocation is now a Sicon allocation, so that we have references to what it is that we need to adjust if we're moving stock around in the barcoding. Shop floor data capture is obviously very important, and that links into both the labour and machine times, but also ties into our operations as well. Just following the process across, materials get allocated and then issued, all the time gets booked, the subcontract operations get costed in, and eventually we do an add stock to book the finished item in. Bit of a summary on the material planning, again demand coming down, just explaining that in a little bit more detail on a slide, would be helpful to refer back to. And similarly with the capacity planning, in terms of what feeds into it, this one elaborates a bit more about the employees, the teams, the work patterns, the timesheets and the holidays going in to feed the capacity to give us a better result out. So we're looking at Sage 200 screen here. The first thing you notice is that this is a fully integrated module. So it sits in the menus, everything's interacting directly with the Sage 200 standard interface. So I'm going to open up the works order processing menu. First thing we'll notice we have a standard works order list here, but for the moment I'm just going to go in and select the process works order screen. So in here this gives us a little bit more information and shows a slightly better view in terms of the structures of the works orders. Gives us a status as well for the parts and some dates when these things are due to be completed. So I'm going to select the top one and just edit this. If you're familiar with the Sage 200 bill of material, the first thing you'll recognise is the Arizona kitchen at the top here, and all of these components are an identical copy of what's on that Sage bill of material. The Arizona sink unit here in the middle is a sub-assembly, so we followed the same theme and kept it highlighted in blue. If I right click on here, we have a whole load of options, but one of them down the bottom here is to show the sub-assembly. So my top level is works order number 1, and my sub-assembly opens up with works order 1/1 to show us a sub-assembly. We have a further sub-assembly in here as well, so we can drill down and see all of those demands. So sub-assemblies all have their own start dates and due dates, which material planning we use. I think in the Sage demo data, the only one that has any labour or machine demand in it is just the top level. So here we can see we've got some runtime for the different elements from that demo data, and the same for the machine time. We've got some setup, circular saw, further setup that goes on. So important element in here, one of the changes that we made in the recent versions is to expand out all the operations, and in Sage they get grouped together, so 12 is grouped together, 13 is grouped together as a single operation, but we felt it was more important to expand these out and show them as individual activities that happen on the scheduler, also for booking time to, and to see progress through the works orders as well. So they've been expanded out, as you can see here. You see for each of the lines as well, I can edit a line on the works order. I have the ability, if I want to go and change the warehouse location for that particular item. I can add comments and text and information instructions for production. These can be defaulted in as well from settings in the stock system. I can also remove lines. I can add new lines, and where it's relevant, I can also do a swap for alternatives where there are alternatives set up against a stock item. So we try to make it really, really flexible to work with. Where quantities get changed, we also capture the original. So the whole thing gets set as a budget. If we look at the works order summary screens, you'll see here we capture budget against the major parts of that works order, and we can capture the actuals as well as items are being issued and booked. So over on the right hand side we can see the finished products. Now it is possible to have more than one finished product. It's quite unusual, but it is possible, and the various items will get listed down here. If you're using that method, then you do need to specify the percentage of the cost that's going to go to each one, but it is a useful way to deal with byproducts that might be produced during production. So that was an existing works order. There's a number of ways to generate new works orders. So down the bottom here we have generate works order from a sales order. They would list out in here and allow us to create them directly from that point. For the moment I'm just going to go and create another one from scratch. So all we need to do is to select the bill of material that we're after, how many we need to create, hit the create button at the bottom. So that'll go off and it'll analyse the bill of material. At this point it's hit that first sub-assembly. So a number of things that we can do here. It's identified that we have enough stock in one of the warehouses, so it's allowing us to pick that particular warehouse if we want to, and use the stock rather than make the sub-assembly. I'm going to choose to make the sub-assembly instead, so we get a full structure. I could also split it and have some as a sub-assembly and some from stock. At the bottom as well I can even have it so that I link to an existing works order that has some spare capacity. So we'll do the same on that one. We have same look as we did on the previous one. Status here of new works order that's been created at the top. Okay, so a number of things that could happen from here. I could start to allocate. So there's options at the bottom here to allocate, part allocate, unallocate. I can issue my materials as well, and I can do that line by line or for the whole works order. I can unissue as well if I need to take stock back. Once all the issuing is done, I can then book my finished item into stock, and you notice grayed out there, there's also an option to unbook. So pretty much you can reverse an entire works order. Should you happen to book it into stock and you haven't yet sold it, you can reverse the whole lot back, break it down into component parts, put all the relevant traceable serial numbers and batch numbers back into stock and start all over again. We also allow some strange things in here that just deal with the odd anomalies that happen in real life. Just adding in non-stock items into a works order. So it's going to build in extra cost into the finished item, and it'll post that cost into a control account so it can be matched off against an invoice later. So the important part about works order processing really compared to a BOM is it gives us a definition of a date. The driving date is the start date for the works order, and that's going to drive particularly into material planning. Generally, I advise people just to leave the settings alone in the defaults. Don't put any constraints on it in terms of dates, and just run it. A bunch of settings down here, but I'm just going to leave them in their default mode and run this through. It's looking for any other demand in the system, so it could be production forecasts in their MPS, sales orders that have been put on but not yet been generated as works orders in the system. It's looking at all the minimum stock levels that exist in Sage as well against all the components. Just standard stock items as well as manufactured items, obviously. Each process of the MRP as well is timed now, so we can see where we might have any performance issues. Obviously against this small amount of data, it's really not going to take very long. MRP can be run against individual warehouses or just an individual stock item as well, if that's what the requirement is. Okay, so results have come up. The first thing that it's showing us here is a bunch of warnings. So these are items, purchase orders that are not going to arrive in time to fulfill our order. And we can drill into some of these. What we're looking at here is the Sicon future stock movements. So quick explanation of this shows us here that we've got 95 currently in stock, but we can see that the balance of this is coming down as these items get consumed, and these purchase orders basically just are not going to arrive in time and for the orders that need them. We can see if we can do something about them in real life. It may be that you can, maybe that you can't. That's the warning messages. There's some reschedule messages in here as well. So there's a couple of works orders in the system that could be brought forward to satisfy demand. We do have there a suggested works order to fulfill a shortfall in stock. It looks just like a minimum stock suggestion. I think demo data has some negative stock in it, so it's suggesting that we build a works order to fill that stock. Most important screen is this one here, which is the suggested purchase orders. While we're busy designing this, the most important thing is that we explain why you need to buy it, and obviously when you need to buy it. So we can just work our way down through these items. So we'll pick the top one. So this one, very simply at the moment, we're starting off, we have none in stock of these particular tiles that we need. We do have a purchase order coming in. A purchase order coming in for 6. It's going to bring our balance up to 6. We then have a sales order that's going to take 5 items out of stock and leave us with a balance of 1. However, our minimum stock level that we're trying to maintain over here is 2 items, so obviously one's going to leave us short. So we have a suggested purchase order for 6 because the usual order quantity from our preferred supplier over here is 6 items. A logical look through will tell us that in theory we don't actually need 6, we could get away with a bit less. But if that's the minimum, we could talk to the supplier, we could change the quantity we want to order and then generate that PO. And it's much the same with any of the items that are in the list. Here we have 221 in stock. We have works orders that need to consume some of those. Again, our minimum stock level over here is 100 we're aiming for, but our usual order quantity from the preferred supplier is 500. So we've dropped below that, we're going to order 500 and bring us back up above that minimum level. So if we look at the screen, we can see the various suppliers down here, the currencies, the prices that have been derived, and the price gets derived from either the last buying price from the preferred supplier if it's there, average buying price if there's nothing else. If there's a purchase order on the system for that particular item, we'll prefer to use that as well. And a summary over the end here, the reasons is a summary of the stock movements that have happened in the system. So typically what would happen at this point is someone would go in and filter the suppliers down, maybe get on the phone and talk to them, confirm the prices for the items, confirm the quantities that they want to buy, select off the items that they want to raise the purchase orders for now, and go ahead and create a purchase order into Sage. And there we have a standard Sage purchase order that's been created with a summary of the reasons that we've actually created at that point in time, because obviously the world might change later on, and when someone comes to receive that PO or question why it was raised in the first place, at least that information is there. Where things have been created with a pre-allocation specifically for an order, that information is also stored on there, so when goods get booked in, they get allocated to the correct place. So where sales orders have different fulfillment methods on them, so supplier via stock and direct delivery, we've pulled all that information into one place, so whoever's doing the buying can do that quite simply from one screen on these different tabs to raise the purchase orders in the same way. Okay, moving on to have a look at capacity planning. So the first thing we show is a rough cut capacity. Really, you want to know whether you've got a major problem on your hands or not from the amount of work that you've dropped into the system. So here we're showing in red our available labour. The items in blue are demand for labour. Purple is our machine. You can see as I'm hovering over there, it's showing us how much we've got, and the machine demand in green. So we can move on and have a look at the schedule. So we've got our works orders that are in here due for this week and for next week onwards. We do allow some amendability in here of the dates, and overdue works orders are now just getting summarised in one place because we don't want to leave them on the capacity plan because they just distort the graph significantly. So we're dropping that information in here, and they can be drilled into to see what's overdue. Okay, we have a plumber that's overloaded on a particular day, so we can go and investigate that and then hopefully do something about it. Now we could go back to our rough cut at this point and go find our plumber, and we can actually see here that we've actually got demand here on a day when there's no availability. So if I drill into that, I can see the two works orders that are causing that demand. I could drill into the works orders and change the dates around, or I can go and sort out some availability for my plumber on that particular day. So if we move on, we've then got our schedulers. So the team scheduler is really looking at what would have been called the resources in the Sage manufacturing system before. So we can look at any of these resources and see the operations that are scheduled for them. So if I come in here and select a few of them, it is a simple matter of dragging these around within obviously the resource that they belong to and moving the dates. Now doing that is going to have some impact on the works orders, so I won't move that in this particular screen. Team view really helps the people in charge of the teams understand what workload they've got and where things are scheduled for. We then also have a works order scheduler, so at a higher level we can see, it's a fairly basic view and I don't think many people will use it, but we can see here the works orders and the sub-assemblies and how they all follow on based on what we've put into the system at the moment. The more important view that I think will be the one that people will be interested in is the operation scheduler. So here you can select the works orders that you need, and we can see a nice flow of the operations going through the system. Now a quick change of scale in here, we change that down to 15 minutes. So here we can see the operations running sequentially for a particular works order going through the day. Some of these operations have no duration on them in demo data, so they're all stacked up on top of each other. Perfectly feasible at this point to just pick these up and start moving them around. But if I move it to a Monday, operations associated to it are going to move out with it as well. You can see it's adjusted its duration. So from a graphical planner type interface, this is fairly simple to use. Moving these operations around, if they go outside of the duration of the start date and due date of the works order, then the works order is going to get moved and there's going to be warnings coming up as we complete this. But from an interface, if you can imagine a series of works orders down the side of the screen, these can be color coded as well based on the type of operation that you're trying to schedule, so make it easier to see what you're looking at on the screen for the different departments, and then just dragging and dropping around. And if you manage to move them around enough and it creates an overload, it will let you know that you've overloaded that particular team on that particular day. So I mentioned future stock movements earlier. We allow you to go into any stock item at any time and have a look at the future stock movements. So we could just pick any random item and look at espresso machines just to see what the status of this. Now this information is also available on sales order processing. If you happen to be in stock control, there'll be a button in there for you to go and have a look at this information, which is much more informative than just looking at stock levels and when purchase orders are coming in. Obviously at that point you don't know if they're free or not, whereas this is creating a demand for the items that are coming in on purchase orders. So a particularly useful screen to use anywhere else in the system as well. Okay, we talked about job costing earlier being used for manufacturing, and the concept of manufacturing that we've adjusted slightly is to allow the operations that we use in works orders to also be used in job costing. So this is the job costing maintenance screen. I won't go into it in too much detail, but there's basic information about notes and addresses and memos. The important one we'll look at this point is the phases and the stages. So this is what I just mocked up for the purposes of this exercise. So we have 3 levels in job costing now. You have phases and stages, and then within the stages you have activities. It's kept to that structure to make it easy for reporting. You can ignore phases and stages if you don't want them and just have activities, but at the activity level is where you budget in your job, and it's at the activity level where you can then add a number of items. So at the bottom of the screen here, you'll see that we have operations. So as I was mentioning, the operations are exactly the same as the operations in works orders. So they'll create demand for materials, they'll create demand for labour, so we can end up with a single capacity plan that's looking across the whole manufacturing piece. So for companies that have both bespoke project work and standard bill of material based works order production, then it's ideal to see that in a single place. So every operation in here will appear on that capacity plan on the schedulers as well. And there's other items in here along with planned purchases. There's also a plant hire system in job costing. For people doing those sort of bespoke jobs, that's often something they need to bring in. And a new element we've added recently is tasks. So tasks can be created and assigned to users inside Sage against lots of things, lots of elements of Sage, but particularly relevant and useful inside of a job. It's quite a simple change to job costing to bring those operations in here, but extremely powerful in terms of what it then lends us for items that are required. Again, it's driven by the date that particular operation starts, duration, we have manning levels, and obviously the team is a common team across both the works orders and the job costing. Okay, so I hope that gives a quick overview and an idea of how the relevant parts of the system join together, how integrated it is into the Sage 200 system. Thank you for listening